of Seven, also known as the G7, to be meeting in Japan for their 49th Leaders Summit. This makes this info series on the nature and character of the Group of Seven extremely timely and relevant. So I want to extend my appreciation, all of our appreciations, to all of you today. My name is Cody Urban, and I'm a member of the Global Secretariat of the Resist US-Led War Movement, a global network of anti-war and peace organizations united against the shared threat of US-led war around the world. And I'll be your moderator for today. Today, we've invited various speakers from across the globe to discuss the pressing matter of the G7, which is composed of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. First, we've invited Antonio Tuhan Jr. from the Institute of Political Economy, Eni Lastari from the International Migrants Alliance, Wali Haidar from the Asian Peasants Coalition, and Azra Saeed from the International Women's Alliance to discuss the relevance of these countries and the whole Group of Seven with us. We also want to acknowledge the efforts of the organizers for the webinar, the Asia Pacific Research Network, the International League for People's Struggle Asia Pacific, the International Migrants Alliance, the International People's Front, People Over Profit, Resist US-Led War Movement, and WORKINS. So now let's get started and let's invite our main speaker for today. Antonio Tuhan is a social activist working on Philippine and international issues for more than 45 years. He's an internationally known researcher, editor, educator, columnist, and writer. He's one of the founders of Ibon Foundation in 1978 and the Ibon International in 2011, and is currently the editor of the Institute for Political Economy in Brussels. He's the founder of several global people's networks, was active in people's diplomacy in intergovernmental bodies like the UN. So Antonio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Cody. I'm very pleased to be invited to speak here today regarding the G7. I have prepared a presentation, and for us, it is important that we have a bit of an understanding of what the G7 is. Many activists around the world, even from the 90s and 2000, have already been familiar regarding the G7. But nowadays, in the context of the multipolar situation of the world, we have a different set of issues facing us in the context of the G7 and the threats, the multiple crises that the world faces today. These are issues regarding climate change, issues regarding the severe crisis that is continuing to batter the economies of the world around the world. And of course, finally, the threat of war, the Ukraine war, and upcoming, the threat of war against China from the United States. Slide, please. So the G7 actually was set up long ago in 1935 when the world was facing the first oil shock and the financial crisis then. Remember, at the time, we talk about the stagflation, where there was a situation, a funny situation, where you have recession, but there was actually a severe inflation that was happening. So a recession, that means that people don't have jobs, that we have that factories are closed, But at the same time, when you have stagnant economy, but you have a financial crisis due to currency depression and the problem of inflation. This is similar to the situation now. The world is facing the fact that all over the world, the recession remains very severe. In fact, the most important areas of development in the world is in East Asia. And that's the reason why you have the Hiroshima summit in East Asia, because Asia has now, in a sense, been able to buck the crisis. And yet the IMF says that the Asia grew only by 3%. In the coming year, it is expected that again, Asia and especially China will be able to carry the weight of the world in terms of economic development. But still, that is relative to the fact that you have a financial crisis now. Before, when the G7 was set up, it was also facing that situation. And therefore, the heads of state and the government of 6 leading industrial countries met in 1975, and they were joined in 1976 by Canada, making up the G7. In the 1980s, the G7 extended its interests to embrace foreign and security policy issues, meaning to say it is no longer about political economy, but the implications on war, on militarization, and so on. International challenges at that time included the long-standing conflict between Iran and Iraq and the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. Next slide, please. Slide, please. Now, this webinar, previous slide, please. This webinar focuses on the nature of the objective of the G7 as a clique of the dominant global powers, meaning to say it's a voluntary formation. They meet annually. There is a rotating chair to discuss common political, economic, and security interests. So from the financial crisis in 1975, they shifted their policy to neoliberalism. So this is when you realize that actually it was the G7 that sponsored the shift into of the project, the neoliberal project that we now call neoliberal globalization, to address the issues of the collapse in 1975. But then it finally led to another collapse in 2008. The G7 has been framed as the free world against the social imperialist Soviet bloc of countries at that time in 1975. But eventually, the Soviet Union collapsed itself and in the 1990s, and therefore there was the end of the Cold War. So post-Cold War, the G7 co-opted the membership of Russia in 1998. In the sense, you could say that we have now turned you into one of us. So the US triumphalism actually took up, looked at Russia as another subaltern imperialist power, but they had conflict over the Western takeover of the former republics, especially Ukraine. Meaning to say, for a period, the Western imperialists, not just US, but also Germany, France, and others, through using the EU, wanted now to take over the different republics of Russia, as also the East European bloc controlled by Russia, by the Soviet Union at that time. And of course, in the end, the focus of attention now shifted to Ukraine, which is the heartland, if you will, of the former Soviet Union. The G7 has been challenged by multiple crises. So we have the economic crisis that I mentioned a bit, the question of climate, the fact that now in the past 2 years, you know, uh, the whole world has been facing all sorts of calamities due to climate change. We have a lot of storms, a lot of desertification, a lot of heat waves, cold waves, and so on. And this is meant to continue as long as the world, the governments, and the whole earth will be able to address the question of the global warming. A corollary to the climate change are the pandemics. The pandemics are an effect also of how the environment has been destroyed. And as a result, you have a lot of vectors around, and you have the mutation of variety of viruses and others, such as now the current COVID pandemic. Now, the question of the G7, in a sense, can be challenged as, we have to accept the G7 because that is the leadership of the world. Meaning to say, the strongest, the richest, those who have the capacity to protect the free world, if you will. And that's why the G7 is considered an important meeting of the heads of state of the 7 powerful industrialized countries. Now, that is leadership. And therefore, you could say that it is for the benefit of everyone, or is it really somebody else benefit? So we could say then that actually the G7 are the meeting of the heads of state of the powerful countries who are actually securing their own and common interests versus the vast majority of the UN membership. You'll find that in the UN, people, also different countries there, are actually suffering under the brunt of the leadership of imperialist leadership of these G7 countries. Now, the EU is added into the G7. And why is it so? Because actually there are other in
Recording in
but
progress.
On one side, you had the free world, supposedly, and the other side is the socialist world under the Soviet Union. So the Western imperialist powers have an alliance, and that alliance is the G7. So it's called Western imperialists, even though Japan is part of it, because in a sense, Japan has a special relationship with the Anglo-Saxon imperialist countries, the other imperialist countries. And they are led by the hegemon, and that is the US. The US hegemonic interests as the leader of the free world against the threat to capitalism, supposedly socialism, and then after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the threat to the free world was now terrorism, supposedly Islamic terrorism, but it's actually in reality imperialist terrorism, if you ask me. And now they have the perceived enemies of in a multipolar post-primacy geopolitics, that is the world today now. You have the enemies are Iran, and the other end of the axis of evil is North Korea. In between that is China, and behind that is the Soviet Union. So these are the enemies of the US, of the Western, of the free world, supposedly, because you have a situation that is no longer bipolar, but multipolar. The US created a comprehensive alliance and patronage over imperialist countries. Meaning to say this, the reason why you have a Western imperialist alliance is because after the World War II, the US came out to be the hegemon. It was the only one who was not affected by the war, but actually profited from the war. He entered the war when it was already almost, the point of victory, if you will. And the US now used the post-war reconstruction for Europe, for Asia, and so on. And so the US had an important position as the remaining hegemon to create a hegemonic power. Historically, because the US now became the sponsor of the creation of the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, and others. The US was behind the process of post-war reconstruction, making sure that Japan and Germany pays for the reconstruction, but in the end, it was controlled by the US. The US controlled trade and investment and used that trade and investment to create patronage over other imperialist countries. And that's why Japan, when it recovered from the war, you'll find now that you already have the hooks of control by the US on the Japanese economy and the US state. You also have the US control on other countries in Europe and so on. And that's why you'll find that the US has a special relationships, whether with UK, with Germany, less on France, but still they're very much, there's a lot of patronage going on. The US also, of course, has a very important role as the backstop, to support the security and military and using the nuclear umbrella. And that's why the US has a special position as a leader of the Western Imperialist Alliance. So you'll find a special relationship within US with the European Union, where even though the EU is a regional formation of independent countries, but they look up to the role of the US, not simply historically, but also in the various areas. And this forms a certain level of patronage, not neocolonialism, but a certain patronage or special relationship, if you will. In the case of Japan, the case of Canada, you'll find that the US has a lot strong links in investment into the economies, into the corporations of Canada and Japan. The same way with US and Germany and France, if you will. So the Western Imperialist Alliance is not a simple gathering of different imperialist powers. There is a special relationship with US leadership, but at the same time, the US has promoted the development and of course, therefore, the relationship with other imperialist countries. And this is the foundation of the G7. The US response to the crisis now is essentially warmongering to dominate other critical and assertive countries. Now, why is it warmongering? Can't the US be doing something else? Indeed, the US, its response to crisis has been to recover what they call the industrial and technology capacity of the US. And that's why the US is very critical of China, because China has been able to surpass or to how do you call this, to has been able to compete technologically and industrially with the US. But the US claims that China is actually stealing information and technology from the US. But the fact is, it is simply additional propaganda and additional reason for the US in pushing for warmongering against China. So other critical and assertive countries that the US is pushing is actually North Korea. The war in Korea has not been, is still under armistice. In effect, the Korean Peninsula is in a state of war. The US uses South Korea, which is a garrison semi-colony. South Korea is industrialized, but it is a semi-colony of the US. The US has long been, has its hooks into South Korea, both economically, politically, and militarily. In fact, if you look at militarily, the military of South Korea is the US. Even if you have 45 military bases in one country, then you are a garrison of the US. So therefore, the Korean Peninsula remains at war, and the Korean Peninsula is an important focal point of warmongering. But for the US, the more important, if you call it the belly, or the softer underbelly of China, is actually the South China Sea, and therefore the area of facing the Philippines is an important weakness against China. And that is why, if ever, in the context of warmongering or creating a war pressure against China, and probably in the end, to goad China to attack the US and the Philippines, then South China Sea is an important corridor by which the US can create, can open a chink on the armor of China. The US, of course, has been more warmongering on anyone. In fact, any country that has been critical of the policies of the U.S. For example, the fact that when Saddam actually negotiated to accept oil payments in euro, that was one of the signals for the U.S. to attack Saddam. You have another case in Venezuela as well. And that's why you have a government that is being constantly being up for invasion by the US. Now, when you look at the G7,
TJ,
yes.
just letting you know we have about 2 minutes left, if possible.
Oh, sorry, I'm getting okay. Indeed, we should add that when you look at the G7, we should also look at the NATO. The NATO is the arm of the Western imperialist alliance in the context of security and military affairs. And of course, we had the end of the SEATO, but now they are rebuilding it in the form of the AUKUS. So when we look at the U.S. Western imperialist alliance in the form of the G7, we should look at it, contraposit it with the horizontal multilateralism of the UN, meaning to say, in international politics, what is premised on equality, cooperation, should be horizontal relations, not top-down relationship by the G7, and it should be multilateralism under the UN. Next slide, please. So the interests of the G7 are, of course, the urgent themes are the pivot to the Orient and the role of China. So there you have one, the question of trade and investments in political economy. Then you have the question of how to secure these economic interests in terms of natural resources, industrial goods, finance and loans and investments. And final additional themes are climate change and supply chains. Next slide, please. Now, for the Hiroshima summit, those themes previously enumerated will be discussed, especially climate and technology. But there's also the question of the security and what we would call the Japan problem. You see, Japan was meant to counter China under the design of the G7 and the US leadership. But Japan has faced more than 15 years of a weak economy. And because of that, whether you look at it politically, economy, but also militarily, Japan has been a problem for the US. You have a peace constitution, and Shintaro Abe had a failed dream to amend that constitution to make to fulfill the militarist agenda for Japan. Now that issue remains, and therefore this is a big issue to rearm for Japan to rearm and join and take its role in warmongering against China. But in the meantime, this is the reason why Quad was created, but India objected it. And now AUKUS was created in time. So you have Australia, UK, and US as the military force or military defense force against China. But what's interesting is there's no Oriental military power, because Japan still has not yet fulfilled the question of rearming itself to militarize itself. So the choice of Japan to host the Hiroshima is to roll out a strategic armament and military mobilization to complete AUKUS as an imperialist security alliance. Next slide. Of course, our demand as the people, our interest is to achieve a people-centered development that guarantees peace and prosperity and protection of the planet. So one, the question of a development, economic development that is premised on prosperity for the people, not corporations. Two, guarantees peace that is not premised on war. And of course, finally, the protection of the planet and to address properly the question of climate change. It is the interest of countries, if you look at now in the context of diplomacy, to achieve equitable development and horizontal international relations, meaning respecting sovereignty, mutual cooperation, and equality. Thus, the G7 is not an answer. In fact, the G7 is the source of the problem of achieving equality in the world. So these principles should be implemented in the context of the UN and other intergovernmental bodies, as well as in bilateral relations from states and international corporations. Meaning to say the question of respecting these relations should also be subjected, should be demanded of international corporations as well. With that, I'd like to, I think my time is up. Thank you very much. And I believe that, sorry. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Antonio. Let's give a big virtual round of applause. I'll remember that one of those points that you ended on, the G7 is not the solution. It's actually the source of the problem. So thank you so much for all your insight on the G7, for all progressive and anti-imperialists around the world to know about. So I know that by now, many of you probably have questions, but remember, we're going to be having a Q&A at the end. So please hold on to your questions until then. So last year, the G7 held their meeting in Germany, while Germany held the presidency, which some of the main points that they covered there speak to what Antonio was saying about it being the Western-led alliance, notably talking about more crippling sanctions on Russia and trying to force the world to end reliance on Russian fossil fuels for the benefit of Western energy companies. So we're completely seeing on these agendas exactly what Antonio is talking about. And this year, like was mentioned, it will be held in Hiroshima, Japan, while Japan holds the presidency. So we'll probably see much more of that happening on the agenda. So we'll have to pay very close attention as activists so we can expose and oppose this. But now we are going to move into our reactors. So we've invited leaders of mass organizations in different sectors, asking them to provide some commentaries on the G7 and how the policies of these richest economies in the world have impacted the lives of workers, farmers, and women. So first, we're going to hear from Eni. Eni Lestari is an Indonesian migrant domestic worker in Hong Kong for over 20 years and a migrant rights activist. She is the current chairperson of the International Migrants Alliance, or IMA, and she has spoken at the UN General Assembly and received several nominations and awards for her dedication and work. So Eni, please give us our first commentary. Floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening from Hong Kong, friends. So this is our privilege to be given the opportunity to share our information and analysis on how the policies and treatment of G7 countries to the migrants and refugees. So I will focus on the impact of the G7 policies to the migrant workers in general. So G7 countries, as has been mentioned by Antonio, that they were second during the World War II, and since then they start importing the migrant labor or migrant workers to their countries. And the importation of the migrant workers were intensified during the neoliberal inception in 1980s for the purpose of economic growth, especially recovery after World War II, especially in the advanced capitalist economies. However, they do not just accept any workers, they highly select the workers only for the skilled and highly skilled workers coming from developing countries. So, and then up to now, there are G7 countries. They host 37 of total migrants, and 40% of them are women. The migration going to G7 countries are highly regulated, and most of the migration channel is only through formal employment, marriage, students, and also others are human trafficking, of course, refugees and asylum seeker. The G7 are also facing another crisis, what we call it population crisis or demographic crisis. So since 2000, year of 2000, they are decreasing in population. The birth rate is very, very small. If you see in that picture, that most of the countries are either very small or even declining, very, very low in the birth rate. And in addition to that, there are also in aging population society. I put in number 1 to 7. Japan is the biggest, followed by Germany, Italy, France, UK, Canada, and US. Practically, in the next decades to come, they are really in crisis of young workforce or workers. So in the eyes of the G7, they consider migration of workers to their countries as a tool for their economic development growth. So it's really within the framework of a businesses. It's really for the purpose of their design of economic growth. And you can see that those government, those G7 are really dependent to migrant workers as their supply or stock of cheap labors. US hosts the most with 45 million, followed by Italy of 10 million. UK has more than 9 million. France has 9 million. Canada, Japan, and Germany. So without the presence of migrants, including young refugees and asylum seekers, this country will really be in crisis of workforce. So realities of migration in G7, as I mentioned, it is highly selective and very discriminative. Many jobs are precarious, temporary, and lowly paid. Women migrants are concentrated in highly feminized sectors, domestic work, care work, health and social and education. Some G countries also impose very specific admission scheme for domestic and care workers that include the number of people they will recruit with a quota, with very little prospect of being a permanent resident and even family reunification. They also do not allow migrants to change employers or other sector easily. Different treatment also applied to different nationalities. Some nationality are more privileged, higher pay, more benefit than other nationalities. International students have been for many years now, and even years to come, will be used as a source of cheap labors. Refugee now become a new source of cheap labor. That's the reason why Germany actually accept more refugees, even while other countries actually refuse because of this population crisis. Migrants and refugees continue to experience discrimination and different barriers in many cultural, language, and even healthcare. Criminalization against migrant refugee community, promote hate and segregation are very, very intense. So I will pick up the concrete example in Japan, how these policies applied in the context of Japan, because it will happen, the summit will happen in Japan. So Japan is population of 125.5 million by 2021. It has 18% of aging population or 65 years old and above, and very low in birth rate. In fact, last year was the lowest because they only have 800,000 birth for 1 year. And there is a prediction in 2050 they will lose 25 million of their population. And 3% of Japan is foreign born. But yet Japanese being a hegemony society, they are also having this inflicted policies of accepting or not accepting this foreign-born or mixed Japanese and foreigner generation. So migration to Japan began after World War II when the government defined citizenship, but they exclude mixed Korean and Chinese and introduced very tight control over new entrant or newcomer because they are very afraid that a lot of refugees coming from ASEAN, knowing that Japan was a colonizer for many ASEAN countries, will influx Japan. So they make it very, very strict not to allow foreigner to come in. And also within Japanese society, there is this hegemony where newcomer is always treated as a threat to the labor market. And also it will destroy the hegemony of the culture and social harmony. However, these policies were changed or become flexible in 1990s and 2010 because of the recession. However, the focus of the importation is only more on skilled workers. For unskilled, it is still highly prohibited. So up to now, Japan has nearly 2 million migrants from Vietnam, China, Philippines, and Indonesia. Most of them working in manufacture and care sector. And it is projected that by 2040, they will need to recruit more 8 million migrants to continue or maintain their economy. So the condition of migrants in Japan, the government defined entitlement according to immigration status. Those belong to long-term residency, permanent resident, student visa, and those belonging to the technical intern or trainee visa. In 1993, they also introduced technical intern training program as a cover to import cheap and short-term migrants, which promote widespread exploitation and human rights abuse, including forced labor and human trafficking. Company owner also can decide how they will apply the policies. Japanese government doesn't even monitor this kind of labor standard in different companies. Non-payment of benefit and social security is very common among workers. Non-payment force of long working hours is very common also. The salary is very small comparing to their actual work. And during COVID-19, for example, a lot of dismissal because the company doesn't operate, and shortened working hours means they receive less salary and they cannot send more money to their family. A lot of stranded migrants because they cannot travel, yet they cannot work also. And also companies are found not to implement the strict COVID testing and protocol. So this is the situation of the migrants in Japan. But in conclusion, what we can say is that migrants in G7 countries are really considered as slaves. We are recruited by this government because we are wanted to maintain the status quo of this government as the imperialist countries of the world, as the dominant and dominating nation in the world, and therefore recruiting a migrant labor with very restrictive regulation and benefit will really be a benefit for their sustainability. However, the reality when it comes to migrant workers, they impose very abusive and modern day slavery against the migrants and also the refugee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annie. Terima kasih. Thank you so much for your points and representing the voices of migrant workers all over the world in the face of the exploitation of the G7 countries. And a connection that I actually made, I wanted to name from your presentation that connects to Antonio's before. As someone based in the United States, I saw that before the US GDP was $25 trillion last year. And yet in your presentation, I saw that there are over 43 million migrant workers within the United States. So my question is, where is that money actually being made? Something for us all to take into consideration. So now we'll move on to Wally to share his thoughts. Wally is an organizer with Roots for Equity in Pakistan. He is an activist working for social, economic, and political rights of small and landless farmers. Wally is currently the Secretariat Coordinator for the Asian Peasant Coalition, or APC, Asia focal person for the Farmers Constituency of the Regional Civil Society Engagement Mechanism, and part of the Coordination Committee, the Asia coordinator of the People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty. So Wally, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Cody. And thank you very much to the organizer for giving me this opportunity to speak to this very important event. As much have been said about the nature of G7 already, but the atrocities of G7 policies in food and agriculture need to be especially highlighted, since I am representing Asian Peasant Coalition, one of the largest peasant formation in the region. Next. So the food and agriculture for G7 in 21st century. As Tony has mentioned, collapse in 1975, then 2008, then again 2020. So it seems like G7 is a bag full of crisis. And in that context, they are proposing food and agriculture policies, which seems to be very, superficial. But they say they are going to fight for food security, against poverty and sustainable agriculture development. And they put a whole lot of money for these kind of food security initiatives. And empowering farmers, increasing opportunity for women, youth, and agriculture sector, expansion of farmers' participation in food value chain. Basically, what all these means that to get hegemony in food and agriculture sector. Next. So then again, after the pandemic, they are coming with the idea of global alliance for food security, jointly with the World Bank and other partners. And they put 4.5 billion to protect the most vulnerable from hunger and malnutrition. Total 14 billion USD for fighting food security in the world. And they are saying that they will make sure the food supply chain, even for Russia, and the sanction will not be impact the food supply chain. Whereas we are witnessing that in the global south, particularly countries like Pakistan, with the rising food prices, it's an unbearable for the working class to have even 3-time meal now. It's become more than threefold expensive than before COVID. And yet again, they are mentioning that focus on consistent and efficient supply of fertilizer, of chemical fertilizer, so that the productivity can be increased. And again, we know that it's not the production, and productivity is not an issue. For the global south is the distribution of the resources, especially the production in many of our southern countries are up to the mark, but yet again, the working class, the masses are facing hunger. Next. So the G7 policy implementing partner, it's very ironic. Huh? They are committing themselves to support and for the UN Food System Summit objective. And we witnessed that during those days, how UN Food System Summit been co-opted by the corporate sector and the Agra, a group of Agra. And in the very face of hunger, poverty, and miseries of the world masses, the UN Food System Summit have nothing to do and didn't come up with a real solution which the current food system is facing. There is no talk about structure changing in the food system. There is no talk about corporate control. There is no talk about climate crisis responsibility going to the historical responsibility going to the developed nations. And yet again, they are partnering with World Bank, IMF, private sector, and we as a group of global civil society and people's movement come up with an idea of a global people's summit as opposed to the UN food system summit. I'll talk in the last point on that a little bit more. Next. So where do we stand? No, it's kind of a reality check. Whatever they have been doing, the G7, and as Tony has been mentioning consistently, that it's not the G7, it's precisely the US behind this this force. So hunger is about 1 billion in the current era, and the fresh evidence that the world is moving further away from the global goal of the ending hunger, food security, and malnutrition in all its form by 2030. This is, of course, you all know, with respect to the Sustainable Development Goal, where they have been targeted by the end of the 2030. There will be no hunger, but situation is very stark. And around 2.3 billion people in the world, about 30% were moderately or severely food secure in 2020. So on those days, trillions of dollars have been put in place for food security. Yet again, billions of people are facing. Next. And for us in Asia, almost 25% people of Asia-Pacific region are currently experiencing moderate or severe food insecurity, with more than 10% of people severe food insecurity category. In 2020, around 2 billion Asians, about 44% of the population, were unable to afford a healthy diet. Majority of them, of course, from the rural population. The population, the toiling masses, those who are responsible and bringing food on our tables are facing acute hunger in the global south, especially the rural population. Next. The land concentration. Overall, South Asia and Latin America, highest inequality, with top 20% landowner capturing up to 75%. These segregation of land control you can see in many of the southern countries. Country like Pakistan, it's become more stark when only 4% of Pakistani landlord have control of 46% of the total land. So it's vary, but the overall the 75% of the agriculture land hold only by the 10% of the landlord owners. 10% of the rural population in 17 countries captures 60% of the agriculture land. In Asia, 28% of the global land deal and 31% of the worldwide total area, such a large scale, infrastructure development. And these land grabs have been happening since past many years, and it's mainly to take away livelihood of the rural population for the corporate interest. Foreign corporation hold 48%, 48.58 million hectare land deal, which is 36%. So it's the data itself shows that whatever policy directions are coming from this Western imperialist alliance, which is G7, are impacting severely to the rural population of this planet. Next.
And Wally, we have about 2 more minutes.
So I'll go into the next. Go to the next slide, please. I'll try to finish. So this is the structural formation. For instance, in IMF, G7, only 7 countries hold 41% votes, which is only 10% of world population. And developing countries, this is 152, hold only 36% of vote, which is 80 more, around 87%. And only 3% of the world population have around 50% of the vote for the IMF. This shows how the structurally the G7 and the imperialist power geared a system where they will confirm their hegemony in the world system. Next. So this is the slide which says how the various countries in the G7, for instance, Germany, France, US, have control over seed, agrochemical, and trade market, and they are among the top 5 in the world, and that's because of these hegemonic policies. Next. And this is the meat. Again, many of the US corporations are out of 5, 4 are from the US. Next. So this is dairy sector. Again, US companies and Switzerland and many European countries are there. Next. I'm sorry, I'm going fast. I need to finish it. So it's the subsidies in the US and EU. You will see that they have been giving trillions, billions of dollars to their farmer, but they are stopping our government through IMF conditionalities to stop the subsidies on electricity, on fertilizer, on other agriculture input. But yet again, they are having control. That's why they are the control of EU and G7 countries in our market. Next. So for us, the way forward, our demand is, of course, implement food sovereignty framework through implementing genuine agrarian reform, which means access and control of all kind of productive resources that at the hand of the toiling masses and working class. Monopoly control in food and agriculture must be end to achieve a hunger, exploitation, commodification of nature resources, land, livestock, water, and seed are among them are the most important. And end of the monopoly capital and corporate control over food and agriculture. And for achieving this, for us now no other way than to mobilize, organize the toiling masses, the working class, to get rid of this hegemonic power of Western imperialist alliance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wali. Thank you so much. Buha shukriya. I wish we had more time. There's obviously so much to say about how the G7 powers impact farming and rural communities. So let's please continue the conversation, because we have a lot of work to do to support our brothers and sisters and siblings in the rural areas. And how shameful, of course, that the G7 has something called a global, what was it? I have it here, Alliance for Global Food Security. And even last year in Germany said that they were going to boost global food production. When so many people, when hunger is rising, so many people are without food and livelihood, what more food production can be squeezed out of the people? So let's definitely keep this in mind as the G7 Hiroshima Forum gets underway. Now we're going to hear from a very dear comrade of mine, and that is Azra Saeed. Azra is with the International Women's Alliance, or IWA. She is a grassroots-based, which is a grassroots-based alliance of women's organizations, networks, and individuals that aims to advance the global anti-imperialist women's movement. Azra explains the intercepts of militarism, patriarchy, globalization, aid, and hunger. She is in the leadership also of the International League of People's Struggle, or ILPS. So Azra, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cody. And thank you everybody for having such brilliant speakers. Each one brought back to us the need for continuing and strengthening and amplifying our struggles So there's not much time. I hope I can, give the whole intervention that I've prepared, but I'll start. Okay, so given that G7 is the most powerful representation of the imperialist might, one has to see how has it presents impacted women's rights, who represent about half of the world population. Ostensibly, the G7 is careful to enunciate women and children's rights in its policy documents. However, one can point out that the women's rights became a focus area only at the 44th G7 summit, which was as recent as 2018, when Canada founded the G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council. At the same time, in the 2021 G7 summit, which was the 47th summit, the presiding UK government basically ignored the 14 recommendations given by its G7 Gender Equality Advisory Council. So much for women's rights, right? In this period, the UK also cut or stopped many of programs that focused on other aspects of gender equality, including care for pregnant women and children. I need not remind ourselves of the overturning of the abortion rights laws in the US, one of the most regressive steps taken by the United States, the most powerful of all the G7 countries. If this is the state of matters within the G7, it's easy to understand the intense misery faced by women across the globe at the hands of the driving force behind monopoly capital. In preparation for the upcoming G7 summit in Japan, the G7 Senior Development Officials Chair summary was released on March 20th, just last month. We see again pontification of women's rights agenda that emphasizes promotion of gender equality and empowerment of women's girls and so on and so on. And then the chair's summary also emphasizes sexual and reproductive rights and with a determination to implement women, peace and security agenda, among others. I would like to focus on this agenda for a moment, the women, peace and security agenda, which seems so central to G7 and crops up in various of its communiques and policy documents. Since the evolution of a class-based structure, we have never seen the world at peace. And with the intensifying imperialism, especially with the United States' diabolical so-called war on terror, the world is now ablaze with protracted wars, where the G7 states can be seen deliberately initiating and intensifying wars of loot and plunder, with Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, and Ukraine most visible manifestations, but not to forget Palestine and Kashmir, of course, and many, many parts of the world. For example, in 2013, almost 10 years after the invasion of Iraq, the country ranked 21st out of 22nd Arab states based on a survey of inquiring women's situation with respect to reproductive rights, health, violence, social acceptance in politics and society. Please note that before the US invasion, Iraq was considered a vanguard of women's rights in the region. Now, Iraq's women face constant domestic abuse, prostitution, illiteracy has increased, has soared actually, and thousands of women have been left widowed and vulnerable. Since the US invaded Iraq in 2003, about 550 to 580,000 people have been killed in Iraq and Syria. We don't have direct numbers for how many women, but at least of them, half are women. Apart from those that have been killed, many have died due to indirect causes such as preventable diseases. More than 7 million people from Iraq and Syria are currently refugees, and nearly 8 million people are internally displaced in the two countries. In Syria, there are 6.9 million displaced, of which 70% are women and children. So the question is, who gains from war? Who gains from the absence of peace and security? According to the CIPRI Arms Industry Database for 2021, the combined arms sales of the world's largest producing and military services companies were $592 billion in 2021. Among the CIPRI top 100 corporations in 2021, Canada and the US are the most represented, accounting for $300 billion in arms sales in 2021. The USA continued to dominate the ranking with 40 listed companies and a total arms sales of $299 billion. The G7's military might is well reflected from the world's most imperious nation, as it has the world's 5 largest arms companies. They have made up the top 5 ranking since 2018. It is these wars of aggression and imperialism that impact women the most. Women make up 59% of the 5.4 million people displaced within Ukraine, and 86% of the 8 million who have sought refuge outside the country are women and children. In the above context, it is truly tragic that the 40th G7 Brussels summit, where Russia had been thrown out, the declaration affirmed the G7's commitment to the values of freedom, democracy, and the universality to fostering peace and security. This commitment to peace and security is reflected in the current Ukraine war. US has now, since the beginning of the war, provided more than 30 billion worth of military gear to Ukraine. So it's very clear why we have no peace and security. It is the kind of capital, the kind of profits that are made in the weapons industry. Nowhere else, no other industry provides this kind of super profits as much as the defense industry. Now, from peace and security, let us move to the climate change issue, another enunciation which resounds in many of the G7 communiques. And it would be more appropriate to talk about climate imperialism and its manifestations. According to the International Energy Agency, G7 members account for around 40% of the global economy, 30% of energy demands, and 25% of energy system carbon emissions. Please let me remind everyone that G7 countries represent only 0.8 million people and approximately are only 11% of the global population. With the colonial history of most of the G7 nations and being historically and currently the highest emitters of carbon emissions, we can only hold them responsible for the current climate crisis and for the ongoing climate imperialist focus of these countries. The most vulnerable countries to climate change, of course, are part of the neo-colonial countries such as Pakistan, Afghanistan, Somalia, Haiti. They are also affected by war and conflict. Pakistan, for example, has less than 1% global emissions, but is ranked among the 10 most affected countries. It is important to note that climate change has also been the leading cause of forced displacement. According to the UNHCR in 2021, number of people forced to leave their homes because of climate crisis in the past 11 years has reached 21.5 million people. According to the United Nations Environment Program, 80% of displaced people due to climate are women. In the aftermath of the 2022 floods in Pakistan, there were about 650,000 pregnant women in the affected areas, in the flood-affected areas. Disasters like these have multiple effects. Rural health facilities are destroyed, food sources are destroyed, cropping land is destroyed, livestock, electricity, energy, and the poorest and the most marginalized, which are of course women, have to even under these circumstances provide care at a minimum to their children and elderly, including people with disabilities. We see an intense increase in domestic and community violence against women, and cases of rape are rampant. In camps, tents, and emergency shelters, while women sleep, wash, or bathe, or dress, the risk of sexual violence is a constant threat and further impacts younger girls and women's mobility and livelihood. It keeps on. I mean, there is a whole range of issues that come with climate crisis, and we don't have the time, but I would like to say the climate crisis is a result of the G7 countries' unabated, unabashed hunger for energy, for consuming more and more, and for producing more and more. And then, of course, it's all for profits. Now, in the context of livelihood and COVID-19, it is not possible to detail the many atrocities faced by women at the hands of the grotesque neoliberal policies of the G7 countries. But it is important to touch even briefly on women's reach to decent livelihood, and of course, the way COVID-19 pandemic resulted in a combined aggression of imperialism and patriarchy against women. No doubt, the much propagated human rights and democratic base of liberal societies under capitalism has been shorn to bits in the aftermath of the pandemic. According to the UN SDG, what is it called? Sustainable Development Goals Report 2022, women accounted for 39% of total employment in 2019. But after the pandemic, women suffered 45% of the employment loss. The ILO reports that at the start of the lockdown, nearly 2.7 billion workers were impacted. And the most hard hit were the informal economy in the new colonial countries. An estimated 1.6 billion informal economy workers, that is 76% of informal workers globally, were significantly impacted with the hardest hit sectors, included accommodation and food services. Among them, women were overrepresented in high-risk sectors. 42% of women workers were working in these sectors compared to 32% men. And these were the women who had much more limited access to health services and social protection. If the issue of livelihood is combined with COVID-19 vaccination, then the measures taken by the richest countries, especially G7, can be considered diabolical. Within the first year of vaccine distribution, high-income countries had achieved vaccination rates of 75 to 80%, while low-income countries had only vaccinated less than 10%. The WHO DG reported that by November 2021, more than 80% of the world's vaccine had gone to the G20 countries, whereas the low-income countries had received just 0.6 of all vaccines. It has been noted that only one woman for every 3 men were being vaccinated. In India, for example, only 37% of people getting the vaccines were women. In South Sudan, only 26% of the people getting vaccines were women. And the result,
Sorry, Azra, we have about 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up. And as a result, women make up 70% of the people who have tested positive for COVID-19. But at the same time, please remember that 70% of the World Health workers are women. Similarly, if you look at livelihood, there were reports that the powerful US and European fashion companies refused to pay overseas suppliers for more than $16 billion of goods worth after the pandemic outbreak. This was in the garments and textile sector. These payments were for orders placed before the outbreak. In many of the garment textile exporting countries, such as Cambodia, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, the factories threw out the workers, millions of workers, and again, a vast majority of them were women. But at the same time, for instance, a corporation called Coal paid $109 million worth of dividends to its shareholders. I had something on agriculture, but Wali has already spoken. I will just say that the WTO agreements, especially the sanitary and phytosanitary agreement, the technical barriers to trade agreements, impact women workers, women farmers directly, and especially the landless workers directly, because they are trying to get hold of our livestock. After getting hold of the seeds of our people, of the indigenous people especially, they are now after the livestock, and they want to bring in their really big, very, very monocultural animals from especially Netherlands and France, the United States, into our countries, into our lands, who will wipe away the livelihood of millions of women. It has already done so, I'm sure, across the country, across the world, and we are seeing that in Pakistan. And I will end with this. In light of the above G7 statements from the 47th and 48th summits that proclaim that the G7 will be leading the global recovery from coronavirus, tackling climate change, and preserving the planet's biodiversity, show how empty and false is the vision of imperialism. One can say that only truth that they have uttered is their promise of promoting future prosperity by championing free and fair trade. Of course, the prosperity is for them, while for the rest of the world, we have only series of multiple crises, one after the other. For us, the people, the women, the way forward is, of course, militant struggles, regain our lands, our livelihoods, and our planet from the vicious grip of monopoly capital. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Azra. Of course, just a reminder, the G7 is not the solution for women around the world. But yet we are shown that there's a new, younger woman G7 leader now, Giorgia Meloni, the Prime Minister of Italy, who we're told is a great example of how far women's rights have come. But Meloni's political party is just the rebranded party of Benito Mussolini. So are we to believe that fascism is the answer for women's empowerment? Well, we all know that women hold up half the sky, but are taking the lead in the anti-fascist struggles against imperialism and reaction. So thank you so much, Azra and Iwa, for reminding us of that. So now we are privileged to have with us participants from Japan, where the G7 meeting is going to be held. Let us give our attention to the Asia-wide campaign against the US-Japanese domination and aggression of Asia, or Asia-wide campaign, AWC for short. And here are the opinions on the matter of the G7 summit. So I believe we have a video message from Yoshio Nakamura. So let us play that right now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yoshio Nakamura, a Secretariat of the Asia-wide Campaign Japan and ICC member of the ILPS. I sent a message from Japan, host country of the G7 summit meeting on this year. The Group of Seven is a framework for imperialist world domination. It has brought about sufferings to the people of the world, especially Global South, in many aspects. Here, I'd like to talk about the situation surrounding the G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima, Japan, on coming May 19 to 21, focusing on the ongoing rising military tension in East Asia. The G7 summit meeting in Hiroshima will further escalate military tensions and war crisis in East Asia. We recognize that military tension in East Asia is now growing day by day. This is brought about the US-Japanese strategy of China containment, or the so-called free and open Indo-Pacific strategy. Under the strategy, the US Biden administration has strengthened its military alliances and military collaboration with Japan, South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and other countries. It has repeatedly held joint military exercises with those countries' forces in different areas in the region. Regarding this, Kishida administration of Japan announced its new security strategy last December 2022. It led further integration of the US and Japanese forces and reinforcement of the US military bases in Japan. At the same time, a crucial decision in the new strategy is possession of enemy base attack capability by Japan's self-defense forces. It's a clear and historic shift from so-called defense-only policies. The Kishida administration also decided double increasing of military spending over next 5 years. Under this strategy, Japan is building and reinforcing its SDF bases now in different islands of Okinawa, southern part of Japan. In this context, the target of the US and Japanese imperialism is the Taiwan Strait. Actually, above-mentioned island is located near Taiwan and may become front line of the possible military conflict. We believe that to stop US-Japanese war provocation and intervention to cross-strait issue is urgent agenda. At the same time, we are witnessing rapid rising military tension over Korean Peninsula now. Massive military joint exercise has been held by US, Japan, and South Korea repeatedly. War exercises were also conducted today. As the statement the ILPS issued recently, we support independent and peaceful reunification of Korean Peninsula and demand to immediately stop imperialist-led war games there. I also want to mention about planned G7 leaders visiting to Atomic Bomb Museum during their stay in Hiroshima. As we are known well, the US atomic bombing on Hiroshima and Nagasaki killed more than 200,000 people instantly, or by the end of 1945. It's a crime against humanity. The sufferings of the survivors and their descendants continue until today. But the US administration, including Biden's ones, has never apologized for it. For the G7 leaders, especially leaders of the US, UK, France, as nuclear powers of the world, visiting to the Atomic Bomb Museum is just a ceremony. In addition, the Japanese government itself has not ratified even the treaty on the prohibition of the nuclear weapons, because they need the US nuclear umbrella and under the US-Japan military alliance. So we oppose such deceptive ceremonies. The Asian-wide campaign Japan, along with other organizations and individuals, plan to hold protests in Hiroshima on coming May. We fight against imperialist world domination and war propagation, in solidarity with oppressed but struggling people of the world. Junk G7. Long live international solidarity. Thank you very much.
Indeed, junk G7 and long live international solidarity. Thank you, Yoshio, for your comments, and we look forward to joining you at the G7 protests in Hiroshima. And I see that Nakamura-san is actually here with us in the webinar, so if you do have questions, you can post them directly to him. But okay, so now we have heard from Antonio, Eni, Wally, Azra, and Yoshio. Now it's time to hear from you, our participants. So for all those questions you've been itching to ask this entire time, they can kindly use the raise hand feature and wait to be called on. And there's actually was a question earlier that was posed, and I'll pose this one to Antonio. There was a question about the recent statements from President Macron of France about Taiwan, saying that the China-Taiwan issue is quote unquote not an EU problem. But Antonio, can you tell us what exactly is the interests of the G7 and NATO when it comes to Taiwan?
Sorry, yeah. The US has been trying to foment subversion within Taiwan to create the illusion that Taiwan is that the struggle or the efforts to create an independent Taiwan is legitimate. In the world today, it has already been established that Taiwan is a province of China. However, the US has consistently blocked the full accession and the unification of Taiwan from China, with China. And therefore, many countries, including therefore from the EU, their position is that they recognize that there is a one China policy. The US is trying to break one China policy. And this is where the US now is using the excuse that there is a forcible unification and invasion. It creates the illusion that China is going to invade Taiwan, but actually that is the ruse of U.S. warmongering. Therefore, for the U.S., the intent really is to create destabilization, especially on the question of Taiwan, and also, of course, in South Korea, and therefore, to start to attack China, it would then have to use the questions of the fact that that China seeks to unite with Taiwan, but the U.S. supports the independent the how do you call this, the belligerence of certain parties, including the current government in power, that wants to ensure that Taiwan remains independent. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, TJ. Another question that came in the chat, this one we can pose to all of our speakers, and that is, and I think some even started to talk a bit about this, but what are some of the people-centric solutions that we can look to as alternatives to the G7? So I'll open that to
Daya, thank you very much for this very important question. So we, the People's Organization, the social movement, trying to bring people-centric solution. When I talked about food sovereignty, it's the people-centric solutions. For the matter of fact, as I shared that during the UN Food System Summit, the global and regional organization come together like PCFS, APC, APRN, and many others across the globe come together and had alternate people-centric solution to the cause being implemented by the G7, particularly G7 countries and their allied corporate sector. So it was endorsed by more than 35 countries, participation by more than 35 countries, and a declaration signed by thousands across the globe. So these are the initiatives can be considered people-centric solution. Now, another attempt we are making towards COP28 is going to happen in Dubai this year. There is a Global People's Caravan we are going to launch. We already launched on March 29 in Bangkok, and we are in process of that Global People's Caravan. Will culminate into Dubai during COP28, and it will be a Global People's Caravan, food, land, and climate justice, where we'll be talking about these very issues which Tony, Azra, Annie, and our friend from Japan raised, and the solution and people-centric solution to that. And these caravan in each country will hold a country-specific caravan, which will lead to the Dubai. Will come up with people-centric solutions, which of course, again, genuine agrarian reforms, and also access and control of all kind of productive resources at the hand of the toiling masses and the working class. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Wally. And I should note that last year at the G7 in Germany, they came up with their own solution. They called it a global climate club, is the solution to climate change. So the imperialists, the capitalists, they have a club. For the working people around the world, we have a united front. So looking forward to building that more moving forward. Maybe to the other speakers, the same question. What are other people-centric solutions as alternatives to the G7? Right, Annie?
The reason why we formed International Migrants Alliance, which was formed in 2008 and unify grassroots migrant, immigrant, refugee, and other displaced people around the world, is precisely because we want to address the people-centric, the migrant-centric, refugee-centric solution, rather than being segregated again. Because in the reality of migration, whether we are temporary, permanent, refugee, or other status, most of us are uprooted from our country of origin. We are so-called integrated in the new society, but not really accepted. And then yet throughout our life, we are treated as a foreigner, as a job stealer. During COVID-19, we witnessed how the discrimination has been intensified and even criminalization. So those things pose a question that the current trend of migration is not a voluntary, as what the G7 always projected. In fact, in different part of United Nations meeting or even other government meeting, the G7, the EU government, or even the US always promote that migration is natural, people move anyway, and it's just a matter how to maximize these people on the move, But the reality of that is really how to expose the truth motive behind this so-called maximizing, which is actually exploitation of migrants and refugees. And the fact that G7 is actually the root causes of why more than 270 or even more than 300 million people around the world are displaced from our homeland. So when we say people-centric in the context of migration, we are actually talking two things. One is about what migrant and refugee want in terms of long-term sustainability based on the principle of human rights, but also how this forced migration or the root causes of migration will also be addressed. And that's the reason why IMA develop a lot of program. We continue engaging with the global formation such as UN, but we also focus our attention and energy to really educate our migrant activists in different parts of the world to really make to inform them, educate them about the reality of forced migration. It is not only about having higher wages, permanent residency, family reunification, because it has now become a system of modern day slavery. In fact, it is the manifestation of so-called, the neo-colonialization. We are being brought outside our country as slave and disposed as they like. So this kind of reality has no other way except through people movement around the world. We need to stop the trend of massive migration, but then it will require movement back home in Latin America, in Asia, Africa, to really address. While along the way, while we are still migrating, we have to continue our solidarity cooperation with local organizations in countries where we are working or living now, and promote unity, because we are also being divided by the government and corporates. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Annie. And Azra, I believe I saw you unmute as well.
What I would like to say is that for women,
Azra, where?
sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
there we go.
I'm so sorry. I was saying that for women, it's a very difficult situation because you see, women face patriarchy at home. And it's a very, very in your face atrocity, which women have to deal with every single day. There is constant verbal, sexual, physical abuse. And so to organize and motivate women against imperialism, we need to have a very clear-cut class-based analysis. And I think that is something which women groups must work on, is to create a class-based analysis. Otherwise, liberal feminists are very strong. And the imperialist countries put intense money into creating these groups of women where, you know, modern living and necessities and consumption, all of that is extremely, sometimes very attractive. And so I think for militant organizations like us, like EVA, our emphasis has been to work double-pronged, to work with patriarchy directly. It's very, very clear to work. It's very, very critical to work with within our communities, with the male members, to sensitize and mobilize them against patriarchy. Otherwise, they become the gatekeepers for women's liberation. And women lose sight of the question of imperialism. And hence, we need to work with the men on patriarchy itself. That's what many of us do. We work directly with men first and try to bring out the communities. When women are liberated from the men itself, then it is an immensely victorious place to be. An immensely militant women's organizations spring very, very quickly, because they start understanding the class dynamics of their oppression, of their exploitation. And hence, to me, we need to go to the grassroots. Our masses are amongst the workers and amongst the peasantry. Those are the true masses that all women organizations, all people's organizations must put their effort to organize. And amongst them, make clear-cut effort to mobilize the women as well. But while mobilizing the men, make sure that patriarchy is addressed directly and challenged directly by the men to the men, so that it is easier for the women then to get access to women. In countries like mine, which is extremely religious, women have no space in public spaces. And to access women itself is very difficult. So I really urge all comrades, all people to sensitize men on the issue of patriarchy. Thank you very much.
I saw you unmuted as well.
Yeah, I would like to, when we're talking about solutions, I think the starting point would then be the goal. So if you have, if the idea is to create a counter formations or institutions, the starting point, of course, is what is your agenda? It goes back to the last slide that I presented. What is the people-centric agenda that should be promoted by all people's organizations? The next question, though, of people-centric initiatives is the question of power, which means to say you can have your agenda, but how do you build that power to behind that agenda? And the assumption, of course, is if you create your own autonomous effort, that autonomous effort it should be premised on building that power. I mean to say you're organizing, you strengthen your organizations, you have actions and so on. But on the other hand, also, I think autonomy would require then to have alliance with other progressive forces, including governments even, who are fighting imperialism, which means to say we should recognize that the enemy is imperialism. And therefore, while we stand on the power of the people for the people's agenda, you can utilize other allies, such as governments who are also fighting imperialism.
And thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming today. There weren't any other questions that were posed in the chat here. And we are a little bit over the time we allotted. So I think this is actually a really great note to wrap up on. We talked about what the agenda of the most imperialist countries in the world as of now are. To finish by talking about what the possible agenda for a people-centric system could be, I think there's no better way to finish. What is the way that we can start to build towards that power that TJ is talking about on all the issues that all of our speakers mentioned? I'm just looking into my phone right now to make sure I have enough of the some upcoming events that everyone can plug into. So just give me a moment. So one thing, of course, so another activity that is coming up is our next webinar on the G7, and that's going to be on May 12th, which is my mother's birthday, coincidentally. And it will be the Rural Peoples Unite Against the G7. That will be a webinar that you can plug into next. And then on May 18th will be a peace summit that will be organized by the International People's Front. That will be held in Japan, in Kyoto, Japan, but will most likely be live streamed for folks to tune in on. And then those who come into, those who do attend the that International People's Front Summit in Kyoto will also then go to Hiroshima and join the protests against the G7 meeting as it is happening there. And so there will be activities to actually directly confront this international imperialist alliance. So please keep following on social media. However you found out about this webinar, that's how you can find out about how to plug into these other activities coming up. So just to conclude real quick, the long list of problems brought upon by the Group of Seven upon the shoulders of the working people across the globe have been shared today and discussed with us by our wonderful set of speakers. That's Antonio, Eni, Wally, Azra, and Yoshio. And then your questions that you had also helped give that life. And they were appropriate, and the responses from our speakers had political acumen. I mentioned that this webinar is part of a series. So again, keep plugging in for the upcoming events. And thank you all again, one more time to our speakers. Let's give a virtual round of applause. Fight on, junk the G7, and long live international solidarity. See you all, friends and comrades.